Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We'll just wait for 2 minutes and then we'll start. Okay, so we'll start with the session today. I hope over the weekend, even though it was festival, you found some time to spend on the exercises and things that we had done earlier. Any questions that you have from the sessions that we have done earlier or from the exercises that you may have attempted during the weekend? Okay, so assuming that there are none, then we'll proceed with the session today. So let's do a quick recap of what we have done last week and in the sequence of things which are required to be done, how do we proceed now? So after having understood a few things as a basics of Python, which is the language which is the most commonly used language in data science and machine learning. Then we started doing things which, as a data scientist, one would attempt to do, or the common tasks that a data scientist is supposed to do. And in that context, we were seeing the entire life cycle of creating the data science solution. I am going through this one because it is very important for all of you to remember that what are the different steps and what are the different sequences in the steps. So first step is to understand the who are the users, what is the purpose of a given task or a given project, what is the output that you're going to present. And these things you need to understand from the project manager, from the customer, from the domain experts. And that perspective, that background is very much required so that you can formulate your problems accordingly. And there would be differences in the formulation of problem depending upon what is your target segment, whether it is going to be for the use of the different divisions within the organization, or is it going to be used by the end customer. Depending upon that, how do you present your uh, findings? What are the different test strategy you have? Many of these things would differ. So it is very important that before we jump into the data, we understand why part of it and who is going to use it. Then we get the data. So after having understood, the data would be either provided to you or you would be required to extract the data from different systems that you have in the organization or different systems even outside the organization. In the process of collecting the data, you will find that different sources are giving you the data about something in different formats. Part of the data may be in source one, part of the data could be coming from source two. You need to prepare a cohesive data where all of these are combined. So that part, and apart from just combining, after you have combined, you will see that there would be lot many gaps in the data, there would be lot many repetitions in the data, and the same data could be presented in different sources in different formats. These are the common problems that you will have. And then the first job is to collate them and address some of these cases of duplication or different formats. That process is called the data munging. And in the process of data munging, now with the help of the housing data set, we are analyzing a few things that we can do with the data. So first thing was to get to know what this data is all about. And many of these things would be very easily done if we bring this data into the pandas data frame, because a lot of operations on a two-dimensional data becomes much easier with pandas. And we have seen that how easy the code is with pandas. So you just create a data frame, you give a name to the data frame. Then on that data frame, you can call different functions like show me the top 5, show me the bottom 5 by data frame, or you give the file name dot head, file name dot tail. Then we can do the slicing to see what are the data at a given place. So we get an intuitive feel of that by seeing the columns. We get to understand what are the different elements. In some cases, you may not get the column names at all. In that case, we can replace the column names as we had done in our backpack problem. So after having got the understanding of what this data is all about, then we do certain operations on data. That is, so having understood the different attributes of the data which we have by seeing what is the data type, then describing it, which shows me the maximum, minimum, the different percentiles, and so on. The second step that we take is understanding the data not just by seeing what it contains and the common attributes of that, but we go into doing the analytics based on certain statistical measures. So as a data scientist, understanding the basic concept of statistics is very much required. So the difference between the statistician, so you may have a person who is just specializing in statistics in your data science unit, but you as a data scientist don't need to compete with a statistician. Data scientist, as we have seen, is a combination of skills which involves programming, which involves statistics, which involves data visualization and communication. So you would be a person who needs to have a certain degree of understanding of statistics, but the expectation is not that you are the statistics expert. So that's why we are going into the basics of the statistics, which will help you understand what kind of data you have and therefore what can be done with the data. And then we saw that the major parts of the statistics that you need to understand, and there would be a few more concepts that we'll cover as we go along, is what is the most likely um, number for any of these attributes or the columns that we have in the table, which will be referred to by different names. So it can be sometimes you will call that a column, sometimes you will call that as an attribute, sometimes you will call that as a feature. In the rows that we have in the data, those rows will be called as either rows or observations or records. So these are the different names which will be used interchangeably to refer to the columns and the rows. So once I have so one row represents one observation or one record or one object. So every data about one object will be in the rows, and different attributes of that object will be in the columns. So for example, if I have data about, say, different people or different employees in the organization, for each employee, you will have a row. And for each attribute of each employee, what is his name, what is his designation, employee ID, salary, performance appraisal, all these will be the columns. That is how the data set would be organized. So for different employees, if I want to see the age column, we would like to understand it mainly from two perspectives. That what is the central tendency of the age, and when we say the central tendency, it means that where is the middle of the age or the most likely number of the age is located. So that would be measured by mean, which is the average. So you can find the average age of the employees. You can find the median age of the employees. Median is the middle number. So if there are, say, 100 employees, you can arrange them in a descending or ascending order and take the middle point of the entire data set, and that becomes the median. Mode is the most frequent one, but we will not use that frequently. So median and mean and the median, these are the two most important measures of the central tendency. So having understood the central tendency, or where most likely the data is located, then we see that there would be a dispersion around that. And dispersion we measure in terms of the simplest one is the range, which is the difference between min and max. So if the oldest person in the organization is, say, 55 years old and the youngest person is 25 years old, then my range is 30 years. Then this data, we have the min and we have the max. We can divide into four parts: the first quarter, the second quarter, the third quarter, and the fourth quarter. Then we get the data at the first quartile, second quartile, the third quartile. So first quartile represents in this case, it will be the age below which 25% of the people are below that age. So suppose we have seen all these numbers, but suppose suppose in this case that we are taking for the company's employees, if there are 25% of the people below 30 years of age, my first quartile would be 30. If there are 50% of the people below the age of 40, my second quartile would be 50. If there are 75% of the people who are below the age of 45, then the third quartile would be 45. Then to find whether they are outliers, we find the interquartile range, which in the example which I was talking about would be 45 minus say 30. So 15 is the interquartile range. And then to find the outliers, normally what we do is that we multiply the IQR or the interquartile range by 1.5, and then add that to the third quartile and deduct that from the first quartile. So, and we saw the how do we draw the box plot. We'll come to that. So these are the, when we are finding the dispersion, we can measure the dispersion in terms of range, in terms of the interquartile range. And then a few other measures we saw was the skewness and kurtosis. The skewness was measuring that how symmetrical the data is around the mean, around the average. So if they are equally distributed on the lower side and on the higher side, and as you plot, it becomes the left side and the right side. So if they are symmetrically distributed, then the skewness, the data is not skewed and the value of the skewness would be 0. But if the data is more skewed to the left or more skewed to the right, then there will be some value to the skewness number. And if it is skewed to the left, it will be less than 0. If it is skewed to the right, that will be more than 0. The other way that we understand the data is what is called as kurtosis. It means that there we are seeing that whether the data is what is the nature of dispersion in terms of the peak and the tails. So if the peak is, if most of the data is concentrated around the peak, then the skewness is higher. And if the tails are more flat, then the skewness would be lower and that number would go into negative. So those things we have seen in the Python notebook, drawing different types of data set and seeing the skewness and kurtosis of different data elements. Then where we ended last week was understanding the correlation. That is the correlation between the different data elements that we have in the data set. So if I have information about the age and the in the employees database, if we have the information about age, if you have the information about the salary and say performance or grade, so we would like to see that is there a correlation between say age and the salary, and that is what the correlation will actually show us. So in the housing price, we have seen that there was a very high correlation between total bedrooms and total rooms, and that was very natural because each house will have a room, each house will have some other, each house will have a bedroom. So the correlation would be very high. And why do we study correlation? Because at some point of time, we need to see that if there are two data elements which are highly correlated, from a data scientist perspective, we need to ask the question that if both of them have a very high correlation, do I really need to know both of these? Or do I really need to use both of these, or can I just manage with one of them? So that's one of the key reasons why we study the correlation. The second reason was that certain algorithms, like say linear regression, if you have too many data elements, or if you have data elements which are highly correlated, it doesn't give you a consistent result. The results become biased. So for running certain types of algorithms, we need to remove the data elements which are highly correlated. So now we'll start this session from here. Let's go to our data set. Working on the housing data set, what happened? So first we need to run all the imports. After we have done the import, then we are reading the file. And this was the file, housing.head. So we get to see what are the different data elements here. We are seeing other kinds of imports, but that will not do. We'll focus on the housing data set. So these were the different functions we had performed. What are the top few items that we can call by head? We can give the parameters here. That is, I want to see the top. By default, it will show you 5 items. But if I want to see different numbers, then we can put a number here, as I have done in the tail. It will show you the top 5 records, whatever name we have given to the data frame.head, data frame.tail. Shape will give you how many columns and how many rows we have. dtypes gives you the data types, whether that's a numeric or a integer or a float or another kind of data object, like string will be shown as an object. And so you get to know that what is the data type of each of the columns or each of the attributes that you have in the data set. Info gives you some more information about what is the number of records, whether they are null or not null. And we have seen last time that for the total bedrooms was one data element where we did not have the data for all the records. So today we'll also see that how to handle that. So if I have less number of records, what do we do with that? That is one of the key things that we need to do as a part of our data management. Describes, we have seen that it gives you the min, max, different quartile ranges. Histogram. Now, understanding the histogram is very important, that how the histograms are drawn, and we had shown that in the table also, that how the histograms are drawn. So in this example, I have data ranging between 10 and 20, and then we can define what is the size of the bin, as we say. So here we have defined the bin size as 1. So it means that between the numbers value 10, there are 5 numbers in the data set which is having a value of 10. We can go and change the bin size. Or it may be called as the bucket size in some other applications. So as we change the bucket size here, now you see that the graph changes. what it again depicts is that between 10 and 12, how many data elements are between 10 and 12? So their numbers is 6. Between 12 and 14, the numbers are 8. So that is how you would draw the histogram. Basically, what it is doing is that it is creating a bucket or a range, bucket or a bin or a range. So in that bucket, that is the bucket which is containing data between 10 and 12, what is the frequency of occurrence? So it has got 6 of them. Now we can change that into, right now it's showing the absolute numbers, but we can change that into percentage and draw a histogram which contains the percentages of the data. So if we convert that into percentage, that becomes the distribution. And we have seen one type of distribution was the normal distribution. So understanding the histogram and how the histogram is drawn is very important, because it shows you the dispersion of data, it shows you the central tendency of data. So for example, by seeing here, you know that this is not normal distribution, because in the normal distribution, the midpoint would be actually the highest, and data would be symmetrically distributed around the mean. This data set is not like that. So coming back to so we saw how to draw a histogram, and had also explained that there are a few functions which are available as a part of pandas itself. So we can draw a histogram using pandas, or we can draw the histogram using the other visualization libraries also, like Matplotlib or SNS. Then we saw that for the data set which are not numeric, we can get their values by value counts. I mean, value counts you can get for the numeric data also, but since that will be continuous in nature, the value counts makes more sense to get for the data elements which are categorical in nature. So again, just to clarify these two words, categorical, when we say this data is categorical, it means that it can only take certain values. So for example, if we say that what is the color can be only a defined number of colors. It can be red, green, blue, magenta, or whatever. You may have 20 or 25 different types of colors, but it will still be a defined values which it can take. But if we take, say, height of a person, then for any measure that we use, it can go into fractions and decimals. Somebody could be, maybe if we are measuring the height in meter, somebody could be 1.5434, somebody could be 1.55, somebody could be 1.5501. So the values that it can take can be infinite, and these type of values are called the continuous values. So you will come across two kinds of values that your attributes can take. One would be categorical, and the second is the continuous. Now, based on the type of the data, some of our computations will also differ, because for the categorical data, we know that it can take only number of items. So if we are finding out to which category it belongs, as we will see later on, we will handle those kind of problems through the classification algorithms. And if the output can be a continuous number, we need to deal with regression algorithms. So as we go along, you will see that based on the type of the data, whether it is categorical or whether it is continuous, some of the approaches that we do or approaches that we take will differ. Now, last time we also saw that if the data is categorical, then it can be of two types. One is the ordinal, the second is the nominal. Nominal is that these categorical data are only names and they don't have any inbuilt hierarchy. So as you are seeing that the values of the ocean proximity, it is near bay or the ocean or inland. Now there's no hierarchy in that. So these are just the description, but there's no inbuilt hierarchy. We can't say that inland is higher than ocean or ocean is higher than island. But there could be other types of categorical data where suppose we had taken the example of the ratings given to a product, which could be excellent, very good, good. So there is an inbuilt hierarchy. And wherever there is an inbuilt hierarchy, we can do the label encoding. That is, we can replace the values with a number, but we can retain that in the same column. So we are just giving a numeric label to a non-numeric data. Sometimes you may have to use that, even for the data which are numeric. So for example, if you have pin codes, the pin codes will be some 500082 or 500032, something like that. The pin code will be there. Now that pin code, if it is given to us in the form of a numeric data, in the system, we also need to see that whether I am going to treat that as numbers, because there is no inbuilt hierarchy, even though the data is numerical. So we'll have to handle that as a categorical data, and that too as a nominal categorical data. But if the if the data is categorical and if the data is ordinal, then we can use label encoding, that also we had seen. And if the data is non-categorical, I mean, if the data is categorical and if it is nominal, then we need to do one-hot encoding, and that's where I think the last session had ended. So let's go to some other steps that we will take as a part of data munging and wrangling. So we have seen this, that we can do label encoding, which is for all the values that we have in the ocean proximity, we are giving a numeric label to that. So near bay could become 3, or inland can become 1, and the other values would be given to ocean facing or other values that we have. Then we saw that giving this could be problematic because there is no hierarchy here, and the algorithms will treat 3 as higher than 1 because these are numeric numbers. So in the numeric numbers, there is a hierarchy, there is a weightage. And that is what we don't want to give. We don't want to give our analytics algorithms to give a higher weightage to near bay compared to inland, because these are just numbers and there is no inbuilt hierarchy. And therefore, we need to find another way where the algorithms would not be able to assign a weight given the numbers. And that's where the one-hot encoding came in. And that process was where we are adding one column for each of the values which we have. So if the ocean proximity had 5 different values, we create 5 different columns. And then whatever is the value, we give a value of 1, and remaining things would have a value of 0. So that's how we did that. So ocean proximity has near bay and inland and other values. So as you can see here, that each of these categories, that becomes a column. And if it is near bay, then I give a value of 1 to near bay and everything else becomes 0. So if you do it like this, then the system will not give a hierarchy or a higher weightage to anyone else, because everything will have a value of 1. So if it is near bay, the near bay will have a value of 1. If it is inland, the inland will have a value of 1. So that's why the process is called one-hot encoding. So things to remember is that if I have a categorical data, and if they are nominal in nature, that is, there is no hierarchy, then I will do one hot encoding. And if they are ordinal in nature, that is, if there is a hierarchy, then we don't need to do one hot encoding. We can live with just the label encoding. So everything can be just given a label. So these are the changes that you may have to do to the database, and that's why this process falls under the data wrangling. It means that now we are not just collating the data, which is and which is data munching. We are now transforming the data so that it becomes easier for the algorithms to process it, and it is also we are presenting it in a fashion that the algorithms will run faster. So these are the two things. These are the two main purposes: to make the analytics algorithms faster, and also to bring it into a format in which the analytics algorithms will accept data. That is what is the data wrangling part is. So one thing we are doing is that I have categorical data. Now, how to convert this into numeric data, because the algorithms will accept numeric data. So one hot encoding, label encoding, that is one part of the process. So coming back to the kind of thing that you would be doing as a part of data preparation. So we have seen, so what we are doing now is called encoding. That is the transformation of the categorical data to numerical data. So we have seen about the level encoding, the one hot encoding. Now we will also see that our data will have outliers, and how to handle the outliers. So we can do a visual inspection by plotting them, by doing a pair plot, or just by seeing the histograms. You would be able to see if there are some data which is completely lying outside the range. We saw how to identify data with the IQR. We have gone through the Z-score. Z-score was the distance of a given data element from the mean represented in terms of the standard deviation. So we have seen how to compute the standard deviation. Just to revisit that, because these are some of the very basic concepts. I will be spending maybe revisiting these things again and again, because as a data scientist, some of the key statistics you should be knowing, and although how these are computed, these are not very important from the operational point of view. From the understanding point of view, at least for a few things like a standard deviation, how do you compute covariance, how do you compute these things, you should be trying to remember and recall. Other things are not really very important to remember, because you can always refer to that. Many of the computations will be all these computations will be done by the system itself. So we don't really need to understand always remember the computation, but for some of the basic ones you should. So we saw the computation of the standard deviation. We take the numbers, we take the average, we take the distance from the average, and then we take the square of that, and we sum the square of that, and then divide by number of records. It could be n or n minus 1, depending upon whether it is a population data or sample data. We find the variance, and the square root of the variance is standard deviation. Now, if we represent these distances from the mean in terms of standard deviation, and to be able to represent that in terms of standard deviation, what do? We take these numbers and divide that by the standard deviation, and that becomes the Z-score. So higher the Z-score, farther it is away from the mean. And therefore, we can say that if the Z-score is, say, higher than 2 or higher than 3, we can take a call, and these are the judgmental calls. We can say that the data is outlier. So Z-score is another way to identify whether I have an outlier or not. Then in some cases, we'll do a log scale transformation. That is, we'll convert the data into the log of that data. And that happens when you have a range which is very wide. So for example, if you take the data of, say, how many people attend musical function. So there could be a small group gatherings. There could be a classical concert where maybe a few thousand people will come, and there could be a rock concerts where maybe tens of thousands of people attend. So if you see, the data would be ranging from a few hundred to tens of thousands, and plotting that in the log scale gives you a much better information. So when the data range is very large, we may decide to transform the data into log scale. Binning, we have seen that in the histogram, we have done the binning. So today we will spend some more time on identifying the outliers and how to handle them. So we have seen the one-hot encoding, so I will minimize that. Okay. Before that, we saw that there was some data missing in the total bedrooms. Now we need to take a call at how to address that problem. So let me call the info function which was giving me this information. So we saw here that every other record has got all the data. So it has 2,640 records. Every other field is complete, but for total bedrooms. So what do we do with that? So that there are three main ways of handling the missing data. One is that we could take a call very simply that whichever record is not having the data, you remove that. In this case, possibly we can afford to do that because the number of missing records compared to the number of total records is not really very large. So we could take a call that these maybe 207 records are missing, and out of 20,000, if 200 is missing, it means that only about 1% of the data is missing. So I can afford to just remove those records. And that's also a valid approach. But here again, there are no hard and fast rules. So here the missing data is only 1%. But suppose that missing data was 10%. What do we do? Our approach cannot be the same. If I remove 10% of the data, then maybe I am missing out on a lot of things, a lot of data which would have been useful otherwise. So only for one field, I don't have the data. But just because of that, if I remove 10% of the data from the entire table, then I may lose a lot of things. So we need to take a judgmental call. In this case, since it is only 1%, you may say that, okay, I can manage by removing this data. So if you want to remove that data, then we can remove the rows, or the other approach that you could take is that remove the entire column. So total bedrooms, it has missing data, remove total bedrooms data itself. But in that case also, you are losing a lot of information. But in this case, you may say that, okay, total bedrooms and total rooms will actually work as a very good proxy for total bedroom, and therefore I can afford to remove total bedrooms. So as we go into the actual prediction of the data or actual prediction of the prices, we will experiment with some of these by removing the total bedrooms and see that whether I am getting a better result or not. By removing just the records which are not having information about total bedrooms, we can see what the impact on the prediction is. But these are the different approaches that you can work with. So three approaches can be done. One is that I can remove the missing observations or missing records, or those observations which have a missing data element or a missing feature. We can remove the entire feature, or we can remove the entire column, or we can fill this missing data with something. Now, we can fill this data with either the median or the average, which is the most widely used approach. That whether I fill that with the median or the average. Now, if we fill that with the average, we run a risk of getting influenced by the outliers, and therefore the most common approach is to replace that with the median value. So I did not have the information about the total bedrooms for maybe over 207 localities, and I can replace that with the median. And I can't go too much wrong, because given the dispersion of data, the likelihood that the data is around the median is much higher compared to the data being very far from the median, or it becoming an outlier. So we still run a risk that we will not have the correct data, because what the data was is not known to me. But the safest bet is to take the median and replace the missing data with the median. So let's see how do we do this. So this process is called the backfilling. It means that we will fill the missing data. So what do we do? For the sake of demo here, I am creating a copy of the housing file so that we don't contaminate the original data. And then we'll do the operations on housing 1. So housing 1, I have taken a copy of that. Then I'll print the info, which should contain that total bedrooms is having only 20,433 records. After that, what we do is we find the median of the data. So we say housing 1, and we take the total bedroom column. So we are taking the total bedroom column, and we say dot median. We have seen this operation earlier. And we store that value into a variable called TB median. Okay. Now I can use this TB median to replace the values. So I again filter out the total bedrooms column from the housing 1 data frame. And then we invoke another very useful function, which is called the fill NA, or commonly it would be called a fill now. So this NA is the not available. So fill the ones which are not available. That is the function that we'll call. Now this is a pandas function. So we'll call the fill NA, and then it is natural for the system to ask you that, okay, you want to fill that with what? And that's where we are giving the median value here. So any value could be given. Now I'm putting here in place is equal to true, because in some of the earlier instances you would have seen that if I do not put here, maybe we should see that what is the in place is doing. So I will first remove this in place, and then we will, So this is the first print where I am printing the information of the housing 1 before I have done the replacement. So here it is showing you 433. Then after that, I said that fill the non-available data. Even then you are seeing it is 433, because the data, the housing 1 data is not yet changed. This command and most of the commands in the pandas will show you that what would be the impact if this command is run, but it does not really change housing 1. So if I want to change it, if I want to change the actual data in housing 1, then I can either say that housing 1 is equal to this one. So whatever is the change data, that gets replaced, or the housing 1 now stores the data which is on the right side. Or if you don't want to do that, the other way of doing that is that within this command, we can say in place is equal to true. The default value is false. So when you say in place is true, it means that now it will not just show you that how it would look like, but it will actually go and replace the data. So now if we run this command with the in place is equal to true, then you see that before the change is done, I have 433 records. And after this command is run with in place is equal to true, you see that total bedrooms is here 640. It means that the remaining 207 records has been filled with the median value. So that's one very important function that we'll perform, because in the real life, whatever data you get, it will always have something or the other missing. It's very uncommon to get the complete data, and therefore this operation you will have to do almost all the data sets that you will receive. So one approach is to fill that data, which is the approach that you should be taking, especially when the number of data elements missing is higher. In this case, we could actually afford to remove them because only 1% of the data is actually missing. But the better way is to fill that with the median. And why do we fill with median? Because the chances that we are wrong is the least when you are taking the median. So that's one approach. The other approach is that we could have just dropped the column. So that we have now I can just drop the number of rows which have missing data. So we'll first print the shape of the data set, then we will remove the missing records, and then we will see the shape. And then so if you see here, what did I do? I took the housing data set, I took a shape before I did the removal operation. So it had 640 records, 20,640 records, and it had 15 columns. Now, what I'm doing with this command is that drop NA from the, so here you focus on this, this function called drop NA. Earlier I had called a function of fill NA. So fill NA is actually filling the data or filling the missing data with some value that I provide. And in this case, we provided the median value. Just as you fill the non-available data, you also have a method to drop the non-available data. And here I am defining a subset that you drop non-available data from the total bedroom column. So it will just scan through the total bedroom columns. Wherever the data is not there, or then in that case, it will remove the entire record. So since it has removed all the records where total bedroom data was not available, now I have only 20,433 records available in my system. So all the records which are not having the information available for total bedrooms have been removed. So that could be another approach. I'm just trying to show you how to use different methods for performing one approach or the other. So if we take an approach of filling the data, we will resort to the fillna or fill NA method. If you want to drop it from the rows, we will use the drop NA function. And if you want to drop the entire column, then we will use the housing.drop and then total define the columns that you want to drop, and I give the name here total bedroom. And so after this, if I want to see the shape, you see that there were 15 columns here. Now the total bedrooms has been dropped. I have only 14 columns. And if I want to just see housing.info, then you will see that, okay, what is happening? The total bedroom is still here. What happened here? Because I have not replaced them. So if I put here is I just give a temporary name here. A is equal to, and then A dot info. You will see that the total bedrooms should not be there because I have dropped it and then stored the new value with total bedroom being dropped to another data frame A. Okay. Okay. So here the shape is not good. So now you see total bedrooms is gone. So this is another demonstration that the commands that you give here, it actually shows you that what the housing data frame would look like with total bedrooms dropped, but it does not change the data in the housing data frame by itself. So either I have to give here in place or I have to store that to some variable. So I can give the housing itself in place of A, and that will replace the value of housing. But if you don't do that, then it only shows you that what would be the impact of this particular function on the housing data set. So either you have to give a variable or you have to give in place is equal to true. Otherwise, it will not actually change the original data. Okay. So these were the three things we could do. Either I drop the entire column. If I want to drop the entire column, I use the command as drop. If I want to drop only certain rows, then I define as drop NA. And if I want to replace, then I use the fill NA command. Okay. These are the three ways that you handle the missing data. Now, having handled the missing data, now we come to what is called as the feature engineering. It means that certain data was given to you. Now we see that can we make some commonsensical changes to make the data more relevant or more appropriate. So for example, let's start questioning the data set we have. And on the study of data set, we found that what we have is not really data of a given house. So even though the problem given to me was to predict the price of a house, because my customer base is the buyers and sellers of the house and they would like to know what the price of a house would be. But the data which is given to us is not really of a house. The data which is given to us is actually for a district or for a locality. And that's how did we start questioning that? Because when we started seeing some of these numbers in how much is the total bedrooms I have or how much the total rooms I have, that was running into hundreds. So let's just see that one. So again, we'll put here housing dot head. Let's see some of this data. So you see the data for the total bedrooms is somewhere it is in hundreds, somewhere it is even in thousands. So obviously it is not a data of one house, but I need to make a prediction of one house. So the question that we need to ask is that do we need to work with this data or should we convert this data into per house? So maybe total bedrooms. Should I not have the data about the bedrooms in one house, the total rooms in one house, because the value of the house or the price of the house will actually be some impact based on how many rooms it has, based on how many bedrooms it has. So if you convert this into per house, if this data is converted into per house data, maybe it will make more sense for us and it will be more appropriate. So can we convert this total bedrooms, which is given this data for 88 total bedrooms are there for a given district or a given locality? How do we arrive or how do we convert this data that how many rooms are there in one house? So by seeing this data, now we are saying that in the form which it is given to us is not the best form. And therefore, if I divide this by the number of households that we have in the same locality, maybe we'll get the at least the average number of rooms which we have in a house in that given locality. So some localities will have a larger home, some localities will have a smaller homes. But if you divide these numbers by the number of households, then I'll get the total bedrooms per house. And if I divide the total bedrooms by the number of households, I will get the total the number of rooms or the average number of rooms per house. And that might be more relevant for us rather than taking the aggregate value, because in some places, see here it is 129, here it is 1000, but that is differing because you have in that locality you have more houses in this and in this locality you have less houses, in the second locality you have large number of houses. So if you divide each of these by the number of households, then I will convert this into how many rooms are there in one house, and then you will see that difference is not much. So if I divide 880 by 126, or if I divide 7000 by 1138, then both of these will be very close to each other rather than 800 and 8000. So are you clear about what I'm trying to do now here and why I am trying to convert this total bedroom into rooms per house? Somebody could respond maybe on the chat or for this feature engineering. Now we are entering into a field where I am manipulating the data. So we need to be very careful that that manipulation is right kind of manipulation or not. And when you are doing this, then you also need to consult your domain experts that whether this change is a suitable change or an appropriate change or not. So what I am trying to say is that I have this data as we established earlier, that total bedrooms is 880 for the first record and say 8000 for the second record. And then initially itself we question that this doesn't look like a data for a given house. Then you will go back to your maybe the customer who has given you the data, and then the customer will explain to you that, okay, sorry, I did not explain to you, the total bedrooms is all this data is actually for a given locality and not for a given house. So now the 20,640 records that we have got is the data for 20,640 different localities or different areas. So for example, they could take say Gachibowli as one area, High Tech City as another area, and then they have taken that, okay, there are 126 houses in this particular area, and the total number of rooms across all these 126 houses is 880. Now, as a data scientist, we should ask the question that the problem given to me is that would you be able to tell me what is the price of a given house? But the data given to me is not per house. The data given to me is for a locality. In that locality, there are 126 houses, and the total number of rooms is 880. Total number of bedrooms is 129 across these 126 houses. So now I am asking a question that for making the prediction, should I just use the data as it is, or should I convert this data to per house? It means that how many rooms I have per house, how many bedrooms I have per house. And how do we do that? That can be achieved by dividing the total bedrooms by households. Let's do that and then we'll see. So here, what we are doing is that we are introducing one more column here called bedrooms per house. And by now you should be familiar with this syntax of pandas, that we can introduce a new column and then replace the values by whatever is on the right side. And the system will automatically, Python would automatically add, or pandas will automatically add this new column, which we are defining here, to the data set and replace the values with whatever is there on the right side. So this syntax means that add a new column called bedrooms per house, because that column is still not there, and replace that with the total bedrooms divided by households. So it will go and replace with, for each row, it will perform this operation. So 880 will be divided by 126. So total bedrooms is 880. It will divide that by households, which is 126. It will go and divide 7099 with 1138. Same operation I do for the rooms per house, not just the total rooms. Same thing I do for the bedroom. Same thing I do for the population here. So population is the number of people living in those houses. So population also, if I divide that by number of household, I would know that how many people are actually living in the house. So I will get the average data. Okay. Now, having got these numbers, then I can say that now I don't need total bedrooms, total rooms and population, because I have converted them. So first, before dropping it, we'll just we are replacing this in housing itself. So we'll okay. So you see these new attributes or new features have been added, or new columns have been added, which is bedrooms per house, rooms per house, and household size. Now you see that the data is almost consistent. It means that in locality 1, I have got 1.02 bedrooms per house. It means that most of the houses are only 1 bedroom houses. There could be a few houses which are more than that. When we come to locality 2, the average bedrooms per house is actually less than 1. It means that there could be some houses which does not have a bedroom. So these could be the studio apartment kind of things, where the house does not even have 1 bedroom. There's only 1 studio room. Similarly, now the data which was very, very different for the total bedrooms, 129 and 1000, now all that has become almost harmonized, because we divide that by number of house. So this is what the point I was trying to make, is that if you convert these into the data per house, possibly it will be a better indicator when we try to predict the houses or predict the price of one house. Then I need to have data of one house, not the data in the locality. Otherwise, what may happen is that it will give you, higher weightage for the total bedrooms in this locality, because these numbers are higher, substantially higher compared to 129. So I hope it is clear to you that why we are trying to convert the total bedrooms into bedrooms per house, or rooms into rooms per house, because we are trying to bring the data to data of one house, because the price which is given to us is the price of one house. The median income given to us is the median income of, since the very fact that we are seeing the median income or the median house value, this is the value of one house. But some other fields are containing data of the aggregate of the locality. And that's why we need to convert this into some more sensible data. And that process is called feature engineering. It means that now we are engineering and bringing out new features, which was not there in the original data.
this bedroom per house was not there in the original data. Now we are introducing something new by combining the two different elements or two different attributes which we had available. So now that since we are changing the original data set, this is called feature engineering. It means that we are engineering or we are creating a new feature. Okay. So many a times as a data scientist, you will have to do feature engineering also. So something which is given to us, now that can be refined further by doing, either addition, subtraction, multiplication, or some other operation and make the data more sensible. Now that we have got this data, the question that we need to ask is that do we really need now the total bedrooms and total rooms? And the very reason that we derived these new elements was that we thought these um, columns are not making much sense for us. So having derived the new columns, we can drop these. So now we are dropping this. So from housing data set, we are dropping the total bedroom, total room, and population because I have got this data in terms of per house. And then we are storing that to some other variable, housing one. And then we will see here housing one dot describe. So now we are seeing the data in housing one, and you see that the total bedrooms, total rooms, and population is gone. So we have dropped those columns, and in place of those, we have got the bedrooms, uh, bedrooms per house, rooms per house, and household size. You could you could have given any other name that you like. So that's another thing that we do. So now we are seeing that we have we are performing the actions where we are manipulating the data. So first we saw that if there is missing data, then we can replace that, we can drop that. So now you are playing around with the data, not just really understanding the data, not just describing the data, not just seeing the median or mean or the kurtosis or skewness of the data. So earlier we were just seeing and trying to understand the data. Now having understood the data, now we are manipulating the data. So that's part will be called the data wrangling part. Okay. So as the point here is that when you receive the data, then it's as a data scientist, you will have to apply your mind and say that, okay, this data that we have got, am I going to use it in the same fashion which I have received? Or are there certain enhancements which I can do so that the algorithms becomes more effective or my prediction becomes more accurate? Okay. So you should be feeling confident to play around with the data. And obviously, when we are playing around with the data, we need to play with certain rules. And those rules would be that if we are replacing, it has to be replaced by something which is more appropriate. So you need to take a call that whether I replace the data with the mean or median or something else. Okay. Uh, Similarly, now we are introducing new data element, but that data element can't be arbitrary. We are deriving those data elements from whatever was given to us. So I have not really lost that data. I have just converted the data which was available in total bedrooms and household into bedrooms per house, into rooms per house, into household per house. But we are still playing around with the data, not that we are going to use the same data which I received. So that's what we are doing in the feature engineering part. Okay. Okay. Now, if we see again, if you see even after having done the change, let's look at the data. We are saying housing one dot describe. So So even after doing all this, if you see bedrooms per house, the max number is 34. Now you will start wondering that what kind of house it is, which has 34 bedrooms. So there is something wrong, isn't it? For at least some localities, it is. So if you see 75 percentile is still giving you 1.09. It means that 75% of the houses are lower than are having a 1.09 bedrooms per house. It means that on an average, one bedroom, some houses may have two. But there are some houses or there are some localities which are showing me the number of bedrooms at 34 and number of rooms as 141. Obviously, it can't be houses. So either there is some discrepancy in the data, or they have also maybe included data of some hotel or something, which will have 34 bedrooms and total number of rooms in that hotel could be 141. So even though the data is claimed to be given to me for houses in all the localities, we are finding that maybe in some localities somebody has done a mistake, because if a house can't have 34 bedrooms, so these are the outliers. And we should now have a strategy, is that having seen this, that everywhere else it is 111, but for some houses it is 34, 141. So let's see that what is the number of those houses. So we are from the housing one data, which is now our new data frame after replacing. We are trying to see that how many data sets or how many rows that we have, how many observations we have, which is having, say, a bedroom of, so number of bedrooms, we will take a call that, okay, if the number of bedrooms is, say, typically even a large house will not have more than 4 bedrooms. And therefore, let's see that how many data elements I have got, which has more than 4. So we see that there are 67. There are 67 records still I have, which is showing me bedrooms having more than 4 bedrooms. Then you will see that, okay, maybe there are some bigger houses and they may have 5 bedrooms. How many are there? So we still have 45, which is more than. So we'll say that, okay, I will give you some more leeway, and maybe there are a few palatial houses which may have even 6 bedrooms. But anything bigger than that, I will not treat that as a house. That call we can take. And these records are only 28. So I can afford to remove these 28 records. And what I'm telling you is are all our judgmental calls. If you put that number as 5 or 7, that is also still fine. But somewhere you'll have to take a call, and that call needs to be taken in consultation with the customer, in consultation with the domain expert of your unit, and say that actually we should drop these 28 records because these are having more than 6 bedrooms, and if I include that in my data set, they will actually contaminate my prediction because their prices could be very high. And these are not really looking like houses. These are not the common houses for which we will be making the prediction, and therefore should I drop this? But that recommendation will have to come from you, because the domain expert or the customer may not even be aware that the data set which he has given to you is having this kind of discrepancy. So now we move into how do we handle these outliers. So a house having more than 6 records is actually an outlier. A house having, say, if you see the number of total rooms per house is 141. So let's see here, how is this playing out? So normally, even if the house is having, say, a 3-bedroom and maybe 5 other rooms if you put there as drawing room and kitchen and storeroom and things like that, let's say that how many houses are having, say, more than 10 rooms per house.
say that there would be six, even in a palatial house, if we are saying that there would be 6 bedrooms and maybe 10 other houses. So let's take some number of 15, and we see that there are about 100 houses which are having more than 15 rooms. So we can take a call that these are looking actually a sort of absurd numbers, and therefore should we remove them? So one way is to remove these or identify these outliers by doing this kind of manual analysis, which we are seeing now, that there are some rooms which are having some houses with more than 100 rooms or more than 30 bedrooms. These ones we are identifying manually, which is also a very genuine process which we need to do. But when you have these very large number of columns and very large number of data, we need to perform, or we need to handle these in using certain measures of statistics. So how do we find the outliers? We can find the outliers by our IQR function, isn't it? So we can identify the interquartile range. So for the bedrooms, and let's first find out this one. Okay. So here now you see we are taking the interquartile range for all our data fields. So, and we want to do our longitude, latitude, that we will not even consider outliers because these are just location of the houses. Now the median age of the houses, we will see that whether we want to remove certain houses if they are very new or very old. But when we come to the, say, bedrooms per house, we would like to see that how many houses are actually lying outside the interquartile range. So that 1.5 times IQR added to Q3, how many houses are actually lying outside that? So that we have found that the box plot could be used. But if you want to remove certain outliers, we could make IQR as one of the measures. So in the previous one, we were just seeing that on visual inspection of data, we could say that remove everything which is having more than, say, 6 bedrooms. Or we could go to the interquartile range and say that here, for my rooms per house, if you see the IQR is 1.6, and so let's see here, IQR plus Q3, I think we should. Yeah. So now if you see, we are taking the third quartile number and we are taking the interquartile range. Actually, we should add the interquartile factor. So interquartile range into 1.5, that is what we are taking, plus Q3. So if you see for the rooms per house, it comes to 8.4. It means that whatever is now, we can take a call that whatever is lying beyond 1.5 times interquartile range added to the Q3, we should remove them. Okay. So anything which is having a value of more than 8.4, we should remove, which is not very far from what we were seeing by manual inspection, where we are seeing that would a house really have more than 6 rooms? Here it shows that there are not many houses. I mean, the interquartile range into 1.5 plus Q3, that is the measure that we had identified for finding out the outliers. So any any house which is having more than 8.45 rooms per house, we'll remove that. Any house which is having more than 1.24 bedrooms. Now here, you still need to take a judgmental call that maybe there would be lot many bedrooms, lot many houses which will have say 2 or 3 or 4 bedrooms. Should I really remove the houses which are having more than 1.24 bedrooms? So we can take a call that no, we will not do. Okay. So that is where if your interquartile range computation and your visual inspection or the common sense computation, they align, then we can just go and remove that. Then the question is that if I want to remove all the houses which are having say more than 9 or 10 rooms per house, how do we do it? So I want you to think about it and use the function, use the methods that we have learned till now. So I will formulate this in the form of an assignment and send to you, that if I have to remove the data of all the observations which I have got, if I want to remove everything which is having say rooms per house as more than 8, or rooms per house or bedrooms per house as more than 1.5 or more than 3, how do you actually do it? So that's one way of removing the outliers. The other way of removing the outliers we have seen is by using the Z-score. So we'll cover that tomorrow, because Z-score is actually a very important measure, because it brings everything, all the data that you have can be converted into standard deviation. So here the differences of, for example, one data element I have in say in lakhs. So all the houses are given in terms of lakhs. All the median income is given in terms of say single digits. And now after having converted, I have the bedrooms available in single digits. So if the data is all of the same order, it becomes much easier to do the prediction. So the question would be that how do I convert this median house also into single digit, or how can I harmonize the range of the data which we have got into a common kind of range? So that we will discuss tomorrow. There are different ways of doing it. I mean, that process is called the scaling process. That scaling process is also very important, especially for making prediction, because if you have data elements which are where the range is very vast, and in this case, if you see one data element is having a range which is maybe from 1 to 10, another data element is having the range which is going from say 100,000 to 500,000. Now, if you have this kind of data, then many of the algorithms that we run for prediction, it gets biased towards, it starts giving more weightage to the numbers which have a higher value. So if without doing any change to the data, or without bringing everything to the same scale, many of the data science algorithms will start giving more weightage to the median house value, because these numbers are very high. And therefore, we also need to find out the ways to bring the entire data onto a same scale. And that process we'll see tomorrow, which is called scaling. And scaling can be done by reducing everything to a range of 0 to 1. So if I take the min and max, if I take the max of say every column here and divide each number by the maximum of that, then everything becomes comes into the range of 0 to 1. So we find the min max range, and from there we can do the scaling between 0 and 1. So that's the min max scaling. We can do the scaling based on the standard deviation. So we find the mean of every column, we find the standard deviation of every column, and then we find the Z score of every column. So every column will now get data between say somewhere around -3, -4 to +3, +4, because the Z score can actually go up to 6 or 7 also. But majority of them, as we have seen, that 68% of the data will be between plus and -1 standard deviation. So between 68% of the records should come between +1 and -1 value. We'll see those things tomorrow. So after having done the scaling, then finding the outlier and removing the outlier makes more sense. So the process would be that I have done the analysis. I have done the analysis based on some common attributes. I have done the analysis based on certain statistical measures. Having done the analytics, now we go into refining the data. So first we see that if there is a missing data, we can take different approaches for handling that, either replace or remove. Then there could be certain outliers. For removing the outliers, we can take the approach of either a manual inspection, and then we can remove certain records. We can resort to IQR, we can resort to Z score. But while doing that, we should also see that either before or after, we'll also have to see that is all my data points are of the same scale, or are they at a very different scale? And if they're at a very different scale, then we need to bring them to a common scale. And that is the process that we'll do tomorrow. Now, this data wrangling and data munching, as we are seeing, is a very important part of the entire data science process. In terms of the general estimation is that on any problem that you work, about half to two-thirds of your time will actually go on, will actually be consumed by these kind of operations. The prediction, the presentation, the visualization will be only half to one-third of the time taken. In terms of significance, those things will be much more important, but in terms of the time taken, the data preparation part normally takes about half to one-third of the time that you will spend on any project. It is important to understand this because you will also have to make the estimate of how much time it is going to take. So either whether you are working as a data scientist in a senior position or in a junior position, when a work is assigned to you, you will have to make an estimation and tell your boss or the customer that this project is going to take so much time, or this work item is going to take so much time. So he may come back and say that, the predictions are making the prediction. Now I have already given you the data. Why would you take so much time? But the fact of the matter is that analyzing the data, doing the feature engineering, doing all these different types of operation of identifying the outliers, removing the outliers, all these things take a lot of time. So the actual prediction, and we will see in our experiments also that the actual work of making prediction, making visualization is actually fairly simple. But the data preparation part it's a time consuming thing. So I am giving you that perspective that about half to two-thirds of the time will go into data preparation of any project that we take. The actual optimization process, the actual machine learning process, the actual visualization process, the actual presentation process will be only about half to one-third of the time. So whenever you are making an estimate, you must keep that at the back of your mind. Any questions from the session today? So starting today, I'll start giving you some small assignments, which will take you about 15 to 20 minutes to work. And then we'll start these sessions from tomorrow please submit those assignments before the session tomorrow, so that we can take up maybe some of these and then see that what has gone wrong and what is going right. And when I take up one of these examples for discussion, it is not to say that so and so person has done correct or so and so person has done wrong. it's all for us to do the learning together. Okay. So expect I will share an assignment sheet. This sheet is already shared with you. It is there in the folder. And work on these assignments, and then we'll start the session tomorrow. Any questions from the session today? So I assume that there are no questions from the session today. Then we'll close the session and get ready for doing the assignment today. Okay? At least one of you confirm that it's fine and there are no questions, then I can close. So again, I would end the session by repeating that if you have anything which you are not able to understand properly, feel free to reach out to me one-on-one, either on WhatsApp or you could even call me. But don't live with the problems. So don't live with the problems, don't live with the confusion. I am always approachable, and I am willing to devote time one-on-one with all of you outside the sessions that we are having in the morning. Main objective is that you should be able to get the context, you should be able to solve the problems yourself, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any problems, either on the concept side or on the programming side. Feel free to reach out to me. We'll work out a time which is suitable to both of us, and then we can have a one-on-one session also. Okay. So with that, we'll end the session today, and we'll again meet tomorrow at 7 o'clock. Thank you.